There is a particular silence that lives inside a great hall when 200 people are talking at once. Most men never learn to hear it. They hear the noise, the laughter, the clink of silver on porcelain, the low river of 100 conversations braided together under a ceiling painted with stars. But a guard who has stood his post long enough learns to hear underneath the noise, the way a fisherman learns to hear the one wrong note in the wind before the squall comes. That night in the long banquet hall of Harrowgate Palace, the noise was louder than I had ever known it, and underneath it I heard the wrong note. My name is Corporal Edrin Vael, of the household foot of the Kingdom of Eldermoor, and I had stood the wall of the great banquet hall on 11 state nights before that one. I knew the rhythm of these dinners the way I knew the weight of my own rifle. I knew when the toasts would come, when the music would soften for the soup, when the great doors at the far end would open to admit the next remove of dishes carried high on the shoulders of the serving men. I knew where to look and where not to look. A guard at a state dinner is furniture that breathes. He is meant to be seen and not noticed, a straight red line along the wainscot, a promise of order that no one in the room is supposed to think about until the single moment they need it. I was not supposed to be looking at the children's end of the table at all. But I will tell you the truth of it, because the truth is the only thing I have ever had worth giving. I had been watching Princess Maelin since the second course. Not staring, a guard does not stare, but the way you keep a candle flame at the edge of your sight in a dark room, so that if it gutters you will know. She was 8 years old that spring, small for her age, with her mother's gray eyes and a stillness about her that was unusual in a girl her age. The stillness of a child who has learned that palaces reward the quiet. She sat at the lower bend of the great table, between her brother Prince Joran, who was 10 and already bored of the evening, and the empty chair where her governess should have been but was not, for the governess had been moved 3 places down to make room for a visiting envoy's wife. That small fact that the chair beside the princess was empty is the hinge on which this whole night turned, and I did not know it yet. The dinner that night was given in honor of a delegation from across the Sunder Sea, a trade embassy from a coastal league whose name does not matter to this story. What matters is that the hall was fuller than usual and louder, and that Queen Maelin herself had asked that the evening be merry. She sat at the head of the table beneath the great canopy of state, in a gown the color of deep water, and she was laughing at something the ambassador had said, her head tilted back, her hand light on the stem of her glass. Beside her, Prince Consort Aldrich leaned in to hear the joke a second time. They were happy that night. I remember thinking, in the part of my mind that was not on duty, that it was good to see them happy. The crown had carried a hard winter. So the table talked on. 200 voices, the music behind them, the great fires in the twin hearths throwing gold across the gilded plaster, the smell of roast fowl and warm bread and the sweet smoke of the candle trees. A merry night, the merriest I had stood. And in the middle of all that brightness, Princess Maelin stopped eating. I want to be careful here because the truth of what I saw is smaller and quieter than people imagine when they hear this story told now. They imagine an alarm. They imagine her flailing, a chair going over, a scream. There was none of that. That is the whole terror of it, and the reason I am telling it the way I am. There was no alarm at all. A small child at the lower bend of a loud table simply set down her little 2-pronged fork, and went still, and lifted one hand a few inches off the cloth, and her gray eyes went very wide. That was all, that was everything. No one saw it. Why would they? Her brother Joran was turned away, telling the boy beside him about a horse. The envoy's wife in the governess's stolen chair was deep in talk with the man on her other side, her bare shoulder a wall between herself and the child she did not know she was meant to mind. Down the table, the laughter rolled on. The Queen's own eyes were on the ambassador. The whole bright machine of the evening was facing the other way. I was 40 feet from her against the wall, with my rifle at my shoulder and my chin level and my orders plain. Stand the wall, see everything, move for nothing but a clear and present danger to the persons of the royal house, and let the household stewards manage all else. I had stood that order 11 times. A guard who breaks his post for a spilled cup, for a fainting guest, for any of the small disorders that ripple through a long dinner, is a guard who has failed to understand what his stillness is for. The stewards manage the room. The guard holds the line. That is the bargain. That is the discipline. I had given 11 years of my life to that bargain, and I had never once broken it. I watched the princess lift her hand a second time, higher now, her fingers spreading toward her own throat, and I understood in the cold, clear bottom of the well place where a man understands things before he has words for them, that the child was not choking the way the word makes you think. She was not coughing. She was not making a sound. She could not. There was nothing moving through her at all. Her face, which had been pink in the firelight, was beginning to change, and her wide gray eyes had found mine across 40 feet of crowded, laughing, golden air, and they were asking me the only question a child ever truly asks an adult. Will you come? I have thought about that look every day since. I will think about it until I die. 40 feet of the king's own hall between us, 200 people who could not see, and one small girl with her hand at her throat looking at the one man in the room whose entire purpose, whose entire training, whose entire being was built around the words "do not move." And I want you to understand the size of the thing I had to decide, and how little time I had to decide it, because the rest of this is the story of 1 minute that has lasted me a lifetime. A minute in which the merriest hall I ever stood became the most silent. A minute that began with a child setting down her fork, and a guard against the wall, and a noise so loud no one could hear the one thing that mattered. I will tell you all of it, the dinner before it, the choice. The thing my hands did before my mind had finished giving the order. The faces when the hall finally turned. And what came after, what the Queen said, and what it cost, and what it meant, and why an old soldier who is meant to be furniture that breathes still cannot speak of it without his voice going to gravel. But it begins 3 hours earlier, in the guardroom under the west stair, with my sergeant pressing a thumb against my collar and telling me my line was crooked. Sergeant Holly's Marek had been a guardsman for 30 years, and there was nothing about a man's turnout he could not find fault with if he chose to. That evening he chose to. He walked the line of us in the low stone guardroom, 8 of us drawn for the banquet wall with a lantern in one hand, and his old gray eyes going over each man the way a smith goes over a blade, looking for the flaw that will fail under load. When he came to me he stopped, and he pressed one blunt thumb against the seam of my collar where it met the throat, and he said, "Crooked Vael. A finger's width. Fix it." It was not crooked. I knew it was not crooked. Marek knew it was not crooked. But that is not what the moment was about. The moment was about the oldest lesson the household foot has to teach, and Marek taught it the way he taught everything, sideways and without sentiment. "A guard who lets a finger's width go on his own collar," he said low, so the others would not hear and I would have to lean in, "is a guard who will let a finger's width go on his watch. And a finger's width on a watch is how a thing gets past you. You understand me?" "Yes, Sergeant." "You don't yet, but you will." He stepped back and looked at the whole line of us. "Tonight is a merry night. The Queen has asked for merry. That means the hall will be loud and full, and everyone in it, every steward, every footman, every lord and lady at that table is going to be looking at the bright thing in front of them. The toasts, the dishes, the pretty foreign wife with the bare shoulders." A few of the younger men grinned. Marek did not. And when a room is all looking at the bright thing, lads, the room goes blind. That is the truth of a great feast. 200 people and not one of them watching. You are the watching. You are the only watching in the room. That is the whole of your worth, not the rifle, not the coat, the watching. He turned to the door. "Now stand up straight and go be furniture." I have heard that speech, or a version of it, 100 times. Old soldiers love a speech. I had stopped truly hearing it years before, the way you stop hearing the bells of a town you have lived in all your life. but something about that night made it land. Perhaps it was the way Marek said, "The room goes blind." Perhaps it was nothing, and I only remember it as meaning something because of what came after, the way we all rewrite the hour before a great thing to make it seem the great thing was coming. I do not know. I know that I fixed a collar that was not crooked, and I went up the west stair into the noise, and I took my place against the wall of the great banquet hall, 40 feet from a chair that should have held a governess and held instead an envoy's wife with bare shoulders. And the room, just as Marek had promised, began to go blind. Let me tell you about the hall, because you cannot understand the minute without the room it happened in. The great banquet hall of Harrowgate Palace is the length of a tilting yard, with a ceiling so high and so dark that the painted stars upon it seem to be real stars seen from the bottom of a well. The long table runs nearly the whole length of it, dressed in white linen so fine it shows the wood grain of the table beneath like water over stones. Down the center march the candle trees, great branching stands of silver holding 100 flames each, so that the whole table swims in a moving gold light that never holds still. The 2 hearths at the side could each roast an ox. When the hall is full and the fires are high and the candles are lit and the music is playing from the gallery above, it is, I will say plainly, the most beautiful room I have ever stood in, and I have stood in cathedrals. It is also a room built to be loud. The high dark ceiling that swallows the candlelight also swallows sound, takes every voice and breaks it up and folds it back so that you cannot, from any one place at the table, hear clearly what is said 3 seats down. This is by design. A great feast is meant to be 100 small islands of talk, each warm and private in the larger glow. It is a marvel of a room. And it is, I came to understand that night, a room in which a child could die 6 feet from her own brother, and no one would hear a thing. The royal family sat as they always sat. The queen at the head, beneath the canopy of state, with the visiting ambassador on her right and Prince Consort Aldrich on her left. Below them the great lords and the chief members of the delegation, and below those the lesser lords, the household officers, the wives, the secretaries, all arranged by a precedent so old and so exact that the seneschal has a book for it thicker than a Bible. And at the lower bend of the table, where it turned toward the gallery end, the 2 royal children, Prince Joran and Princess Maelin, placed there because the lower bend is the safe, quiet, watched corner, near the children's own household, away from the wine and the politics. Except their household had been moved. I had watched it happen in the half hour before the queen entered, when the seneschal's men were making the last adjustments to the placing. A senior man of the delegation had brought his wife, unannounced and unplaced, and rather than send her from the hall, which would have been an insult to the embassy on the very night meant to honor it, the seneschal had done what seneschals do. He had shuffled. He had moved the children's governess, Mistress Anwen, 3 seats down the table to open a chair and put the envoy's wife in it beside the princess. A reasonable choice, a diplomatic choice, the choice any good seneschal would make. And it meant that the one adult in the hall whose single duty was to watch Princess Maelin and Prince Joran eat their dinner was now too far away, and too walled in by strangers, to see the lower bend of the table at all. A finger's width, that is all it was. A small, sensible, well-meant adjustment to a seating plan, made by a competent man under pressure to keep an embassy from taking offense. No one did anything wrong. I want that understood, because in the days after there was a great deal of talk about blame, and people wanted there to be a villain, and there was no villain. There was only a loud and beautiful room, and a reasonable decision, and a quiet child and a fork. I took my place on the wall, the trumpet sounded from the gallery, the great doors opened, and Queen Saralind of the royal house of Harrowgate came into her banquet hall in a gown the color of deep water, with her husband at her side and her 2 children rising to meet her, and the whole bright room rose with her, and the merriest night I ever stood began. For 2 hours it was only beautiful. I will not pretend I spent those 2 hours in some heightened state of dread. That is not how a watch works, and any guard who tells you he felt the danger coming all evening is lying to make himself a prophet. The truth is duller and harder than that. For 2 hours I did my work, which is the work of seeing without being seen to see, and most of what I saw was ordinary and good. I saw the soup go round, a pale gold broth in shallow bowls, and I saw the princess refuse hers, because she did not like soup and never had, and I saw Mistress Anwen 3 seats away now, walled off by the envoys people, catch the girl's eye down the length of the table and give a small private shake of her head that meant eat something, child. Asterisk, and I saw Maelin make a small private face back that meant I am eating, I am eating. It made me want to smile, the way that particular silent argument has gone on between governesses and children since the world began. I did not smile. A guard does not smile on the wall. But I marked it. The governess was watching, even from 3 seats down. The watching was still in the room. Good. I saw Prince Joran spend the fish course explaining to the delegation's young secretary, a serious boy of perhaps 15, the precise difference between a courser and a destrier, with the total confidence of a 10-year-old who has read 3 books on horses and ridden 2 ponies. The secretary listened with the grave patience of a young man who has learned that princes are to be agreed with, and Joran, sensing he had a captive audience, expanded his lecture to cover saddles, then bits, then the proper care of a horse's feet, until even the patient secretary began to glaze. Joran was a good boy, loud and generous and certain of everything, the way a heir is raised to be. He loved his sister with the rough offhand love of an older brother who would have died for her and would also pull her hair. That night he was turned away from her, lost in his own bright island of horsetalk, and I do not blame him for it. He was 10. The watching is not the work of children. It is the work of the man on the wall. I saw the wine go round and the talk grow warmer and the laughter come more easily. I saw the queen at her ease, truly at her ease, in a way I had not seen since the winter. There had been a hard season in Eldermoor, a failed harvest in the eastern shires, a sickness in the spring that had taken too many, a strain with the very coastal league this dinner was meant to mend. The crown had not had much to laugh about. And here tonight, with the embassy charmed and the hall full and the music sweet, the queen was laughing, her hand light on her glass, her head tilted toward the ambassador's joke, and Prince Consort Aldrich was watching her laugh with the particular look a man gets watching his wife be happy after a long time of not. It was good. It was the whole point of the evening. The realm needed its queen to charm an embassy, and the queen needed an evening of being only a woman at a merry table, and for 2 hours she got it, and I was glad to stand the wall of that gladness. I saw the fowl come in. This matters, so I will be exact. The 4th remove was roast fowl, small game birds, partridge and quail, brought in whole on great chargers and carved at side tables by the household carvers, then plated and set before each guest. For the children the carvers prepared smaller portions, the meat taken off the bone because that is the rule for the young at a state table. No bones before the children, lest a child gnaw a bird the way a child will and choke on a splinter of it. The rule is old. The rule is wise. The rule is why everyone in the days after was so certain that what happened could not have happened. There were no bones at the children's places. The carvers always take the bones. It is the rule, and they were right, and it did not matter because it was not a bone. I have gone over it 1,000 times, and I will tell you what I believe, though no one can ever be perfectly sure. The princess, who did not like soup and had been told to eat something, and who had pushed her fowl about her plate as children do, finally took a proper mouthful to satisfy her governess's distant eye, a good-sized piece of the boned meat, perhaps with a fold of the soft bread she did like, perhaps washed at with a too quick swallow of water because she wanted it gone, and it went down wrong. That is all. It is the most ordinary accident in the world. It happens at kitchen tables and farm tables, and the tables of the poor every day of every year, And most of the time someone is sitting close enough to thump a back or hook a finger or simply be there. And it passes in a frightened minute and is forgotten. It is only a catastrophe when it happens in the one place in the world where 200 people are present and not one of them is close enough, or quiet enough, or watching. The merriest night I ever stood had arranged, with the best intentions of everyone involved, exactly that. I felt the first wrong note perhaps a quarter of an hour into the foul. I could not have told you then what it was. It was nothing I saw. It was an absence, the way you notice, in a familiar piece of music, that an instrument has dropped out before you could name which one. At the lower bend of the table something had gone quiet that should not have been quiet. I let my eye move there, slow, the way a guard's eye moves, not snapping but drifting, so as not to draw notice. Prince Joran still talking horses, his back half to his sister. The envoy's wife in the governess's chair, her bare shoulder turned away, deep in talk with the man beyond her. The empty space of attention where a watching adult should have been and was not. And the princess. She had set down her fork, both hands were in her lap. She was sitting very straight, very still, and her chin was lifting just slightly, the way you lift your chin when you are trying to draw a breath that will not come. Her lips were parted. No sound came out of them, none at all. And as I watched, it could not have been more than 2 or 3 seconds, though it has lasted me 20 years. She lifted one hand from her lap and brought it slowly, almost shyly, to the front of her own throat. It is the sign. Every guard, every nurse, every mother knows it without being taught, the way you know the look of fear on a face you have never seen before. The hand to the throat, the wide eyes, the silence, the body's last honest signal when the noise has failed. I cannot breathe and I cannot tell you so. And she was looking at me. Across 40 feet of golden, swimming, deafening air, in a hall built to swallow every cry, a small girl with her hand at her throat had found, of all the 200 faces turned away from her, the one face that was turned toward her. The man against the wall, the furniture that breathes, and her gray eyes, her mother's gray eyes, fixed on mine and asked me the question, the only question, the question I have answered in my sleep 10,000 nights since. Will you come? Now you must understand what those words mean to a man in my coat, because the whole of the next minute lives in the gap between the question and the answer. A guard of the household foot does not break his post. I have said it already, and I will say it again, because there is no way to make you feel the weight of that minute without making you feel the weight of that rule. It is not a guideline. It is not a strong suggestion. It is the spine of everything we are, drilled into us from the first week of training until it is not a thought but a reflex, until the not moving is more natural to us than the moving. The whole worth of a ceremonial guard, the whole reason a kingdom dresses men in red wool and tall fur and stands them like statues at its most precious doors, is that they will not move, that they cannot be drawn off. That a man may scream in their faces, weep at their feet, fall down before them in a fit, and the guard will stand, because if a guard can be drawn off his post by a commotion, then a commotion is all it takes to open the door he guards. The stillness is not vanity. The stillness is the lock. A guard who leaves his post for the wrong reason has, in that instant, betrayed the whole thing he exists to protect. And there were 100 reasons in the first second. To believe this was the wrong reason. A child sets down her fork at a long dinner. A child goes quiet. A child puts a hand to her throat, perhaps her collar itched, perhaps she had a tickle, perhaps she was only tired and leaning on her own hand. Children do 1,000 small, strange things at a table. If I broke from the wall and crossed 40 feet of the king's banquet hall, shoving past footmen, scattering the order of the evening, and reached the princess to find her merely fidgeting, if I laid hands on a royal child in the middle of a state dinner, in front of a foreign embassy, over nothing, I would not only be finished as a guard, I would have done a real harm. I would have insulted the embassy the whole evening was built to charm. I would have frightened the child and shamed her family, and made of myself the very thing a guard must never be. The man who could not hold still, who broke the room for a phantom. Merrick's voice was in my ear even then, a guard who lets a finger's width go on his own collar. The discipline cut both ways. The discipline said, "Do not move for nothing." But the discipline also said something else, and this is the thing that took me 11 years to truly learn, and that I learned all the way down in the space of perhaps 2 seconds against that wall. The discipline does not exist to make a statue. The discipline exists to make a man so completely the master of himself that when the one true moment comes, the moment all the not moving was asterisk for, he can move with a speed, and a sureness that an undisciplined man could never find. The stillness is not the purpose. The stillness is the saved-up power. Merrick had said it himself, and I had heard it 100 times and not heard it once. You are the only watching in the room. That is your whole worth. Not the rifle, not the coat, the watching. And what is the worth of the watching if the watcher, having seen the one thing no one else can see, holds still? I want to be honest about the order of it, because people who hear this story want me to have been a hero, and a hero decides. The truth is I did not decide, not the way you decide what to wear or which road to take. There was a second, a single, terrible second, in which I stood on the knife's edge of the rule, and every drilled reflex of 11 years held me to the wall, and the cold clear voice in the bottom of me said asterisk, it is nothing, hold, and the child's gray eyes said asterisk, will you come, and her hand was at her throat and no sound came out of her, none, and her chin was lifting and lifting after a breath that was not there. And then I saw her face begin to change. That was the end of the second. Not a thought, a fact. The pink of her cheeks going to gray at the edges, the particular dusk that comes into a face when the breath has truly stopped. I had seen it once before, years ago, on a drowned man pulled from the moat, and I knew it in my body before my mind had the word for it, and the knowing did what no argument could have done. It cut the rope. I do not remember choosing to move. I remember that I was moving. I have been told since, by men who were there and saw it, that I crossed the hall faster than they would have believed a man in full ceremonial kit could move, that I went from a red line on the wall to a blur in the candlelight between one breath of theirs and the next. I do not remember speed. I remember the strangest thing, that the world went quiet. Not the hall was as loud as ever, 200 voices and the music and the fires. But inside me everything went very quiet and very slow and very clear, the way Merrick had always promised it would if I ever did the work right. The not moving had saved up its power, and now it spent it all at once, and in the spending there was no fear and no doubt and no hall and no embassy and no rule. There was a distance of 40 feet, and a child at the end of it who could not breathe, and the simple animal arithmetic of how to cross the distance before the child could not be saved. I went between the chairs, not around the table. There was no time for a round. I have a memory, sharp and absurd, of a footman's face as I came past him, a young man holding a silver ewer, his mouth opening into a perfect circle of astonishment, the ewer tilting, a thread of water beginning to fall, and I was already past him before the water reached the cloth. I have a memory of a great lord half rising in my path, his hand going out to stop me, a guard, breaking the order in the Queen's own hall, and of putting that hand aside with my forearm, not roughly but absolutely, the way you put aside a branch in a forest you must get through. I have a memory of the envoy's wife, the woman in the governess's chair, turning at last as I came down upon her, her bare shoulders swinging round, her painted face cracking from charm into shock, her mouth shaping a word I never heard. And then I was there. I was at the lower bend of the table, beside the chair of Princess Maelin of the royal house of Harrowgate, 8 years old, with her hand at her throat, and her face gone gray and her gray eyes still on me even now, having held me across the whole hall and the whole crossing, flooding with the last thing in them, which was not fear any more but something worse, the beginning of the going away that comes when the body has run out of the breath to fight. The hall had not yet understood. That is the part people cannot believe when I tell it. Even then, even with a guard in full kit having crossed the entire banquet hall like a thrown spear, even with a great lord half risen and a footman's ewer spilling, and the envoy's wife turning in shock, even then the far end of the table was still laughing. The queen had not yet seen. The music still played. The room was a half-second behind the truth, the way a great crowd always is, the wave of understanding only just beginning to roll up the table toward the head. I had perhaps that half-second of the room's blindness left to me, and I had a child who was not breathing. I knelt, and I did the thing I had been trained to do, and had never, in 11 years, once needed to do at a feast, the thing that would either save her or fail, in front of 200 people and a foreign embassy and her mother the queen, who had not yet turned her head. We are trained for this. People do not know that about the household foot. They think we are taught only to stand and to march and to present arms, and we are taught those things until they are bone deep, but we are taught more. We are the bodies nearest the royal persons. We are, in the worst minute, the first hands. So we are drilled in the cold yard, with a straw figure and with each other, again and again, until it is reflex like the not moving is reflex, in what to do when a body fails. When a man falls. When the breath stops. When the heart stops. When a thing is lodged where the air should go. We are taught it patiently and exactly, and most of us serve our whole lives and never use it, and that is the best outcome, and you train for it anyway, because the one time you need it there is no time to learn. I knelt at the princess's chair, and I did not waste a word, because words were not what she needed, and there was no breath in the room I could afford. I put my left arm around her small front low, and brought her up and forward off the chair so that her weight came over my arm and her head went down. Down is the whole of it, the body's own weight made into a tool, the head below the chest so that whatever falls, falls out and not deeper in. And with the heel of my right hand between her shoulder blades, sharp and sure and exactly as hard as a child that size can be struck and no harder, for there is a craft to it, and the craft is everything. Too soft does nothing and too hard does harm. I struck. Once. A clean, downward, driving blow, the force of it angled up and out along the path the air wants to travel. Nothing. I want to tell you that the first blow did it, that it was clean and quick and merciful, because that is the story everyone wants. It is not the story. The first blow did nothing. I felt it do nothing, felt the small body jolt under my arm, and felt, in the awful clarity of that slowed down quiet, that nothing had shifted, that the air still had no road. And in that instant something happened that I have never told anyone, that I will tell you now because you have come this far with me and you deserve the whole truth. In that instant, with the first blow failed and the child going grayer over my arm and the hall just beginning to scream behind me, I was afraid. Not the clean cold fear that sharpens a man, the other fear, the bottomless one, the one that says you are too late, you came too late, you will hold this child while she goes and there is nothing you can do. It opened under me like the moat under the drowned man, and for one heartbeat I nearly fell into it. And then Merrick's thumb was at my collar, crooked Vael, fix it, and the cold came back, because the craft is not one blow. The craft is the second blow, and the third, and the not stopping, and the not falling into the fear. And I had been drilled in the not stopping by a hard old man in a cold yard 100 times for exactly this heartbeat, and the drill held me when the man in me wanted to break. I struck again, heel of the hand between the blades, sharp and sure, up and out. And on the second blow, I felt it move. It is a small thing, the feeling of it, and the largest thing I have ever felt. A give, a shift under my hand deep in the small chest, the road opening, and then a sound, not a clean sound. A terrible, wonderful, scraping, whooping sound, the sound of a child dragging in the first breath after the breath that nearly didn't come, the rawest and most beautiful noise I have ever heard in my life. The princess's whole body convulsed over my arm, and she coughed, a real cough, a wet racking child's cough, and she breathed, and she coughed, and she breathed again, gulping the golden candle-lit air of her mother's banquet hall in great ragged sobbing pulls. Alive, alive, asterisk alive. I did not let her fall. I brought her up against me, her small back to my chest, and I held her there with one arm while she shook and coughed and wept and breathed, and I put my other glove, my white glove. I remember the white of it against her dark hair, flat and gentle on the crown of her head, and I bent down close to her ear, and I said the only words I said in that whole minute, low, just for her, under the rising roar of the hall. I have you, little one, you're safe. Breathe, that's it, I have you, you're safe now, breathe. And she breathed. Behind me, the hall had finally caught up to the truth, and the hall came apart. I had my back to it, kneeling, the child against me, so I did not see it begin, I heard it. I heard the wave of understanding I had outrun finally crash over the table, and it was a sound like nothing I had heard in that beautiful room. A sound of 200 people going from laughter to horror in the space of a single second, chairs scraping back, a glass shattering somewhere, a woman's voice rising into a cry, the music in the gallery stumbling and dying note by note as the players, the last in the hall to understand, saw at last what every face below them was turned toward. And over all of it, cutting through all of it, one voice I knew, that the whole kingdom would have known, the voice of Queen Maelin of the royal house of Harrowgate, who had turned at last from her ambassador and her wine and her merry evening to see a guard kneeling at her daughter's chair with her daughter in his arms. One voice crying out a single word, a mother's word, the same word in a palace as in a hovel. Maelin. I felt the queen behind me before I saw her, felt the rush of her, the deep water of her gown, the whole canopy end of the table emptying as she came down the length of it, not like a queen, but like a mother, faster than a queen is ever supposed to move. The ambassador forgotten, the embassy forgotten, the dignity of the crown forgotten, 200 people forgotten. Everything in the world narrowed to the one small, coughing, breathing, weeping child in the arms of a guard, who had broken every rule he had ever been given. I turned, still kneeling, and I held the princess out and up, not letting her go, but turning so that her mother could see her face, see her color coming back, see her breathing. And I looked up for the first time since I had left the wall, and I saw the queen's face above me, and I have never seen a human face hold so much in one instant. Terror and hope and disbelief, and a love so naked it was almost terrible to look at. All of it crashing across her at once as she dropped to her knees on the floor of her own banquet hall, in her deep-water gown, in front of the whole staring, stunned, silenced embassy, and gathered her daughter out of my arms. And the hall, which had screamed, went utterly silent. I have stood in cathedrals at the most sacred moments of the realm and never heard a silence like the one that fell on the banquet hall of Harrowgate then. 200 people, and not one of them breathing, as if, having seen a child nearly lose her breath, the whole room had forgotten to take its own. The fires cracked in the hearths. The spilled water dripped from the table's edge onto the stone. And in the center of it, on the floor, a queen knelt holding a coughing child, and a guard knelt beside them with his white gloves empty now and his bearskin somehow still on his head, and the whole machinery of state, the embassy, the precedents, the merry evening, the careful diplomacy of a hard year, lay in pieces around us like a dropped dish. Princess Maelin was breathing. That was the only fact that mattered to me, and I held on to it. Her breath was ragged and her face was streaked, and she was crying now, the loose, helpless crying of a frightened child, which is the most blessed sound a frightened child can make, because a child who can cry like that is a child who can breathe. Her mother held her and rocked her and murmured into her hair the wordless mother sounds that are older than any language, and the prince consort had reached them now and was on his knees too, his hands on his daughter and his wife both, his face white as the linen, and the three of them made an island of themselves on the floor of the hall, and the whole staring world stood off from it as you stand off from something holy. I did not move from where I knelt. I did not know what to do. There is no drill for after. There is a drill for the failing body and a drill for the stillness on the wall, But there is no drill for the moment when a guard finds himself kneeling on the floor of the king's banquet hall with the royal family weeping in a heap beside him, and 200 faces turned upon him, and absolutely no order in the world covering what he should do next. So I did the only thing my body knew how to do. I knelt straight, and I lowered my eyes, and I waited. It was the prince consort who spoke first. Aldrich lifted his white face from his daughter and looked at me, and his eyes were not steady, and his voice was not steady, and what he said was not grand or noble or the sort of thing that gets carved over a door. He said, in a kind of broken whisper, she wasn't no one we didn't and could not finish any of it, because there was nothing to finish. The horror of it had just landed on him, the truth that his daughter had been dying 6 feet from him while he laughed at a joke, and a man does not have words for that in the first minute. He stopped trying to make words. He reached out one shaking hand and gripped my forearm, the same forearm I had used to put aside a great lord's hand a minute before, and he held it, hard, the grip of a drowning man, and that was all he could give me, and it was more than any speech. I have served the prince consort for years. He is a quiet man, a scholarly man, not a soldier, sometimes mocked behind hands by the harder sort of courtier for his softness. There was nothing soft in his grip that night. There was a father in it, and a father's grip is the strongest thing there is. Then the queen spoke. She did not look up at first. She kept her cheek against her daughter's hair, and she spoke into the child, but the hall was so silent that every soul in it heard her, and what she said was the question that the next part of this story turns upon, and I did not understand its weight until later. She said, very quietly, "How did you know?" I did not understand it. I thought she was asking how I had known the drill, the craft, the blows. I started to answer that we are trained, Majesty, but she lifted her head then and looked at me, and her gray eyes, Maelin's gray eyes, the eyes that had crossed the hall to me, were wet and burning and utterly clear, and I understood that was not the question at all. She was not asking how I knew the craft. She was asking how I, alone in a hall of 200, in a room built to blind everyone in it, with my back 40 feet away and my orders chaining me to a wall, had known that her daughter was dying, when her own brother had not known, when her governess had not known, when her own mother had not known. How had the man who was forbidden to move been the only one who saw? And I did not have a good answer for her. I have never had a good answer for it. I said the only true thing I could find. I said, "She looked at me, Majesty. She was looking right at me, and I was the only one looking back." The queen closed her eyes. A single tear went down her face and fell onto her daughter's hair. And in the great silent hall, somewhere down the table, someone began, softly, to weep. It should have ended there. In the story people tell now, it does end there. The guard saves the princess, the queen weeps, the hall is moved, the curtain falls on the warm tableau. That is the version that gets told, and it is a good version, and it is not a lie. But it is not the whole of it, and the whole of it is harder and stranger and, I think, more worth the telling, because the saving of the child was the work of 1 minute, and what came after was the work of many days, and it was in those days, not in that minute, that the true price of what I had done came due. Because not everyone in that hall was weeping. I felt it before I saw it. The watching, my old companion, told me that somewhere in the stunned and weeping room there was a knot of attention that was not warm, that was cold and calculating and turned upon me. I lifted my eyes from the queen and let them move slow across the hall, and I found it. The delegation. The embassy from across the Sunder Sea, the whole reason for the evening, the guests the realm had spent a hard year courting. They stood together near the head of the table, and they were not weeping, and they were not moved, or if some of them were, their faces did not show it. Their faces showed something else. They showed shock, yes, but a particular kind of shock. The shock of foreign men who have just watched an armed soldier of a strange court break from his post and rush, weapon and all, into the very heart of the royal family, putting aside a great lord's hand and laying his hands upon the royal children's table in the space of a few violent seconds. And who do not yet know, who cannot know, who have no way of knowing, whether they have just witnessed a rescue or an attack. And standing a half step in front of them, his charm gone, his face a careful blank, was the chief of the delegation, the envoy himself, the husband of the woman in the governess's chair, and his eyes, when they met mine, were not grateful at all. They were the eyes of a man already calculating what this would cost, and who would pay it, and how it might be turned. The eyes of a man for whom a guard rushing the royal table was not a miracle but an incident, and an incident, in the hands of the right man, is a weapon. I did not know his name yet. I would come to know it very well in the days that followed. Lord Cassian Rayfort, special envoy of the Maritime League, and the man who would spend the next week trying, with every cold and clever instrument at his command, to turn the night I saved the princess into the night a Harrowgate soldier assaulted a state dinner, and to take my head, and perhaps more than my head, in payment for it. But that is the days after. In the hall, in that first silence, none of it had begun. There was only a queen on the floor with her daughter in her arms, and a prince consort gripping a guard's arm, and 200 souls holding their breath, and far off in the gallery a single trembling violin note as one of the players, not knowing what else to do, began, very softly, to play. And then Sergeant Marek reached me. He came through the hall the way he came through everything, without hurry and without hesitation, a gray-haired pillar of a man parting the stunned crowd by the simple force of knowing exactly where he was going. He had been posted at the great doors. He had seen the whole of it, had seen, I learned later, one of his own men break from the wall and cross the hall like a loosed arrow, and had felt, in that instant, the same bottomless thing I had felt at the first failed blow, except that what Marek had thought he was watching was a guardsman gone mad or gone over, a soldier rushing the royal table with a weapon, the single worst thing a household man can do. He told me, weeks afterward over a cup of something strong, that in the 2 seconds it took him to start moving he had been certain he was about to watch me commit a treason, and that he had been reaching for the whistle to call the hall's other guards down upon me. And then he had seen the child's gray face over my arm, and understood, and the whistle had stayed in his pocket. He reached me, and he did not say anything grand either. He put one hand on my shoulder, a heavy hand, the hand that had pressed a thumb to my collar 3 hours before, and he gripped it once hard, and he said very low for me alone, "Good lad." 2 words. From Marek, 2 words like that were a sonnet. Then he straightened and became the sergeant again, because someone had to be, because a queen was on the floor and an embassy was watching, and the hall was a held breath that could not be held forever. And in the whole stunned room, the only man whose training reached to the asterisk after asterisk was the old one. "Majesty," Marek said, and his voice carried, calm and level and certain, the voice of a man who has handled disasters for 30 years and will handle this one too. "Majesty, the princess needs a physician, and air and quiet. With your leave I'll have her carried to the green chamber and the household surgeon brought, and I'll clear the hall." He did not wait for a long answer. He knew the queen could not give one. He simply began to do it, and the doing of it was the kindest thing anyone could have done, because it gave the frozen room a current to move in. What happened next happened fast, and I will give it to you fast, because the hall emptying was a blur even as I lived it. The household surgeon, Master Pelham, a calm round man who had been at the lower end of the table, was already pushing forward, and he knelt and looked at the princess with his quick gentle hands, at her color and her breath and her eyes, and he said the words that broke the last of the spell. "She's breathing well, Majesty. She's breathing very well, the color's good. She's frightened, but she's whole." And at "she's whole" the queen made a sound that I will not try to describe. The sound a mother makes when the word she has been dying to hear is finally said, and the prince consort bowed his head, and around the hall, released at last, people began quietly to weep, lords and ladies and footmen and foreign envoys alike, 200 people letting go of a breath they had held too long. They carried the princess from the hall. Merrick himself carried her in his great careful arms, with the queen on one side and the prince consort on the other and Master Pelham fussing alongside. And as they passed me, Maelin, over the sergeant's shoulder, looked back at me. Her face was wet and her eyes were enormous, and she was still hiccuping with the aftershocks of her fright. But she looked at me, the way she had looked at me across the hall, and this time the question in her eyes was a different one. The first question had been, "Will you come?" This one I could not so easily name, but I have thought it was something like, "Was that you? Did you come?" A small child reaching, in the wreck of her terror, for the one steady thing that had appeared in it. And I did the only thing I could do, kneeling there as they carried her past. I brought my white-gloved hand up and I touched it to my brow in a salute, not the parade salute, the stiff ceremonial one, but the smaller, older thing, a soldier's quiet acknowledgement of someone who has come through a hard fight. A salute from a guardsman to an 8-year-old girl in front of the staring court. And I will carry this to my grave. She lifted one small hand off the sergeant's shoulder and she gave it back to me, a clumsy child's salute, fingers to her own wet brow, before they bore her out of the hall. I do not know how many people saw that. I have been told since that a great many did, and that of all the things that happened that night it is the one that the court remembers most, the small salute exchanged between the guard and the child he had saved. I did not do it to be remembered. I did it because I did not know how else to tell her I was glad she was alive. Then she was gone, and the doors closed behind her, and I was still on my knees in the middle of the emptying hall, and the strength went out of me all at once, the way it does after, the cold, clear power draining away and leaving the man behind it shaking. I have seen it in soldiers after a fight. The steadiness that holds a man through the worst of it lets go the moment the worst is past, and the body remembers all at once that it was afraid. My hands were trembling. I looked at them, the white gloves, the same hands that had been so sure a minute before, shaking now like an old man's. I knelt there and I made them stop. It took longer than I would like to admit. Merrick came back for me. He had given the princess to the surgeon at the door and come back into the hall, and he found me kneeling and got me up onto my feet with a hand under my arm, the way you get a drunk man up, except I was not drunk, only emptied. "On your feet, Corporal," he said quietly. "You don't kneel in this hall. You stand it now." And I stood it. I got my feet under me and I straightened my back and I leveled my chin, and the old reflexes took the weight that my will could not, and I stood, swaying only a little, in the wreck of the merriest dinner I ever guarded. And it was then, standing, that I saw the hall clearly for the first time since I had left the wall, and saw what my crossing had cost in the small physical sense. The overturned chairs, the broken glass, the spilled wine spreading dark across the white linen like a wound, the great lord whose hand I had put aside standing pale and affronted and rubbing his wrist, the footman with the ewer still clutching it empty, the candle tree I had brushed in passing tilted and dripping wax, the envoy's wife in the governess's chair sitting frozen with her hand at her own throat in unconscious echo of the child's. The merry hall was a battlefield, in the small way that a banquet can be a battlefield. And down at the head of it, where the embassy stood in its cold knot, Lord Cassian Rayfort was speaking quietly to 2 of his men, and not one of the 3 of them was looking at the broken glass or the spilled wine. All 3 of them were looking at me. Merrick saw it too. He did not turn his head. Merrick never turned his head when he wanted to look at something. It was one of the 1,000 small disciplines that made him what he was, but he saw it, and he said under his breath, so low I barely caught it, "Steady, lad. The hard part's not done. The hard part's the men who weren't crying." And then, louder in the sergeant's voice for the hall, "Corporal Vael, you're relieved of the wall. Report to the guardroom and wait on me." Which was the kindest order he could have given, and also, I understood even then, the necessary one, because a guard who has just broken his post in front of a foreign embassy cannot be left standing it, and the appearance of the thing now mattered as much as the truth of it. I saluted, and I marched out of the great banquet hall of Harrowgate Palace down the length of the wreckage, past the broken glass and the spilled wine and the staring court, with my back straight and my chin level and my hands not quite steady. And the last thing I saw before the doors closed behind me was Lord Cassian Rayfort's cold, clever, calculating eyes, following me out. I did not yet understand that I had not finished a thing. I had only started one. The guardroom under the west stair was empty when I came down into it, and I was glad of the emptiness. I took off my bearskin and set it on the bench and sat down beside it and put my head in my hands, and for a while I did nothing at all but breathe, which struck me, when I noticed it, as a bitter sort of joke, that I should sit there gulping air so easily an hour after a child had nearly died for the want of it. I do not know how long I sat. The candle on the wall burned down a finger's width. My hand stopped shaking. Somewhere above me, through the stone, I could feel the palace moving in the particular way a great house moves after a shock. A low, busy current of feet and voices, doors, the household reorganizing itself around the wound. I thought about the princess. I told myself over and over the only fact that mattered. She was breathing, she was whole, the surgeon had said so. I held that fact like a coal in cold hands. Whatever came of this night for me, the child was alive, and I had been the one who saw, and a man can stand a great deal if he has that to stand on. It was Marek who came down at last, near the turn of the night, and he was not alone. With him came a man I did not at first know, tall, spare, perhaps 60, dressed in dark sober clothes without ornament, with a long clean-shaven face and eyes that took in the whole of the guardroom and me in it in a single unhurried sweep. Marek presented him with a formality I had rarely heard from the old sergeant. Corporal Vael. This is Lord Edmund Thornley, Lord Steward of the household. He'll want your account of the evening. I stood, of course, and the Lord Steward gestured me to sit, and took the bench across from me himself, and folded his long hands and looked at me with those unhurried eyes and said, "Tell me everything, Corporal. From the beginning of the dinner to the moment Sergeant Marek relieved you. Leave nothing out and add nothing in. I have heard a dozen accounts already tonight and no two of them agree, and that does not surprise me, because a dozen frightened people who saw a thing for 2 seconds will give you a dozen stories. I want the one account from the man who saw it for the whole minute. Take your time. Be exact." So I told him. I told it the way I have told you, though more plainly, without the things I have come to feel in the years since. I told him about Marek's speech and the moved chair and the loud blind room, about the soup and the fowl and the governess walled off 3 seats away, about the fork set down and the hand to the throat and the gray eyes finding mine across the hall. I told him about the second on the knife's edge of the rule, and I did not hide it, did not pretend I had not hesitated. I told him there had been a moment I had nearly held my post, and that what had broken me from it was the color changing in the child's face. I told him about the crossing, the Lord's hand put aside, the failed first blow and my fear, the second blow and the breath. I told him what the Queen had asked and what I had answered. I left nothing out and I added nothing in, exactly as he had said. He listened without a single interruption, those unhurried eyes never leaving my face, and when I was done he was silent for a while, and then he said something I did not expect. He said, "You hesitated. You've just told me freely that for 1 second you nearly held your post and let it pass. Most men, telling this story to the Lord Steward with their career in the balance, would leave that part out. Why didn't you?" I said, "Because it's true, my lord. And because the hesitation is the part I'm least proud of, and a man should not leave out the parts he's least proud of, or his account isn't worth having." Lord Thornley looked at me a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes that I could not read, and he said quietly, "No, it isn't." Then he stood and smoothed his dark coat and said, in a different voice, a heavier one, "I'll tell you how the night stands, Corporal, because you've dealt squarely with me and I'll deal squarely with you. The princess is well. She's sleeping. She's been seen by 2 physicians, and there's no harm in her beyond a fright and a bruise on her back where you struck her. which her mother has been told of, and which her mother says she would gladly see 10 of, in exchange for what the bruise bought. You are, by every account but two, the man who saved the heir's sister's life tonight." He paused. "But there are 2 accounts that say otherwise, and the 2 are the only 2 that, just now, the Crown cannot afford to ignore." "The embassy," I said. "The embassy." He sat down again, slowly, as if the weight of the thing made him tired. "Corporal, I am going to tell you something about tonight that has nothing to do with the princess and everything to do with what happens to you now, and I want you to understand it clearly, because a guardsman who doesn't understand the ground he's standing on can be knocked off it by men who do. Do you know why that dinner was given?" "To honor the delegation from the Maritime League, my lord." "A trade embassy." "A trade embassy," Lord Thornley said, "that this kingdom has spent the worst year in a decade trying to bring to terms. The harvest failed in the East. You'll have heard that much. What you'll not have heard, because it's not the sort of thing that's said aloud, is how close the failing came to being a famine, and how the one thing that has stood between the eastern shires and a hungry winter is the grain that comes up the Sunder Sea in the bottoms of Maritime League ships. We need them, Corporal. We need them badly, and they know we need them, and the whole of that merry dinner, every toast, every charming word from the Queen, every seat in the Seneschal's book, was a piece of a long, delicate, desperate effort to keep that grain flowing on terms the kingdom can bear. The Queen laughed at that ambassador's jokes tonight because the eastern shires eat this winter on whether she can keep that table merry. I began, at last, to understand the size of the ground I was standing on. And into the middle of that, the Lord Steward went on, in front of the chief envoy of the only friend standing between us and a famine, an armed soldier of the Harrowgate household broke from his post and rushed the royal table. He held up a long hand before I could speak. "I know what you did. I have told you I know, but hear how it can be told. Hear how a clever man means to tell it. Lord Cassian Rayfort, the chief of that delegation, has already sent word, tonight, within the hour, before the princess was even asleep, requesting an urgent audience on a matter of, his words, the gravest concern for the safety of his mission. He means to say that the discipline of the Harrowgate household cannot be relied upon. That a guard who will break his post and lay hands on the royal table on a whim is a guard who endangers every guest beneath this roof, his own delegation foremost. He means to make your rescue into a question. And a question raised by the man who holds the grain. At the moment the kingdom can least afford to offend him, Corporal, that is a weapon and he is aiming it, and I will not lie to you about where it points. It points at you." The candle guttered. Marek by the door had gone very still. "They mean to ask for me," I said. "They mean to ask for your head," said Lord Thornley, as a gesture, a guardsman dismissed and disgraced, to show that the Harrowgate household takes the safety of its guests so seriously that it will break the very man who frightened them. It would cost the crown 1 guard and buy the crown an envoy's goodwill at the worst possible hour. From a certain cold seat, Corporal, it is a very reasonable trade." He stood again and looked down at me, and his unhurried eyes were not unkind. "I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you because you dealt squarely with me, and because in 3 days there will be a hearing. The envoy has demanded it and the crown cannot refuse it, and at that hearing the whole of this will be decided, in front of the court and the embassy both. You will stand and give your account. Lord Rayfort will stand and give his. And the Queen will have to choose in the open in front of the men who hold her kingdom's bread, between the guard who saved her daughter and the goodwill that feeds her people." He turned for the stair. "Sleep if you can, Corporal. You'll need it. The minute in the hall was the easy part. The hard part is the 3 days and the men who weren't crying." He went up the stair, and his words went up with him and hung in the cold guardroom, and Marek and I were left alone with the guttering candle. And after a while the old sergeant said the only thing there was to say, which was nothing I could hold on to and everything that was true. "He said, "now it starts. I did not sleep much that night. I lay in my narrow bunk in the guards' barracks and listened to the breathing of the other men and thought, as a man does on the night before the rest of his life will be decided, about how I had come to be lying there at all. I was not born to it. No guardsman of the household foot is born to it. That is not how the thing works in Eldermoor. I was born in the eastern shires, in fact, in one of the very villages I would think of with a strange twist later, that now ate or starved on the grain in maritime league ships. The third son of a man who shod horses, with no land coming to me and no trade either, for my father's forge would go to my eldest brother, and there was no room at it for a third pair of hands. I was a big lad, strong and steady and not clever in the way that wins a boy a place at a desk, and at 16 I did what big, steady, not clever boys with no land have always done. I walked to the city, and I took the crown's coin, and I became a soldier. I will not tell you the whole of my service, for it is not what this story is about, but I will tell you the one part that made me what I was on the wall that night, because Lord Thornley, in his unhurried way, had put his finger on the thing without knowing it when he asked why I had not left the hesitation out of my account. There was a winter, years before Harrowgate, when I was a young soldier in a frontier garrison in the cold north of the realm, and there was a night when a thing happened that I did not handle well. I will keep it brief. A man under my watch, not a child, a grown soldier, a friend, took a fever in the night and made small sounds in the dark, and I, half asleep on watch and certain it was nothing, certain a man does not make a great commotion over a comrade's snoring, did not get up. I told myself it was discipline. I told myself a good soldier does not break the quiet of the watch over a friend turning in his sleep. And in the morning my friend was dead of a thing that, the surgeon said after, a man at his side in the night might well have saved him from. He had been calling for help. In the small sounds I had told myself were nothing, and I had lain in my bunk and called my deafness discipline, and a man had died 6 feet from me while I congratulated myself on not making a fuss. I have never told that story to anyone but Marek, and I tell it to you now only because it is the hidden hinge of the whole of that night in the banquet hall, and because I will not have you think I was a hero who simply knew. I was not. I was a man who, 15 years before, had once mistaken his own laziness and fear for discipline, and had let a life slip away into the silence because he could not tell the difference between the stillness that is duty and the stillness that is cowardice. I have carried that dead friend every day of my life since, and I have come to think, that I was watching the princess that night, that my eye kept drifting to the lower bend of the table when it had no orders to, because of him. Because somewhere under the 11 disciplined years, there was a young soldier in a cold north barracks who had learned, at the worst possible price, that the stillness can lie. That sometimes the small strange sounds in the dark are not nothing, that a man who will not move when a life depends on it is not disciplined, he is only frozen and calling his fear a virtue. So when the Lord Steward asked me why I had not left out the hesitation, the true answer, the one I did not give him, was this: because I knew the hesitation. I had met it before. I had met it in a cold barracks 15 years gone, and it had cost me a friend, and I had spent 15 years swearing it would never again wear the mask of discipline and fool me. That second on the knife's edge in the banquet hall was the same second from the barracks come round again, the same lie-whispering asterisk hold. It is nothing. A good soldier does not make a fuss asterisk. And this one time, I had known it for what it was, and I had not let it win. The dead friend bought the living princess. That is the whole of the secret, and it is not a heroic secret. It is only the kind of hard wisdom a man pays too much for and then, if he is fortunate, gets one chance to use. I told myself, lying in the dark, that whatever the hearing made of me, that one thing was paid in full. The child was alive. The lie had not won. Whatever Lord Rayfort and his cold, clever eyes did to me in 3 days, they could not take that. I rose before dawn, as I always do, and I cleaned my kit as I always do, because a man's hands need work on a hard morning. And a little after sunrise a page came to the barracks with a summons that made the other men go quiet and look at me sidelong, for it was not a summons to the guardroom or to the Lord Steward. It was a summons to the Green Chamber. The princess, the page said, was awake, and had asked for me. Had asked for me by name. The queen had sent for me at her daughter's asking. I will not pretend my hands were steady as I made myself presentable. I went up through the waking palace with my heart going hard, not knowing what I would find or what I should say, for there is no drill for being summoned by a child you have pulled back from the edge of the dark. Marek walked me to the door of the royal apartments and no farther. A sergeant does not go in there, and he left me with a look that said be yourself and say little, which is the whole of Marek's wisdom on every social difficulty there has ever been. The Green Chamber was full of soft morning light. The princess was propped in a great bed that made her look smaller than ever, in a white nightgown with her dark hair loose, and a faint shadow of gray still under her eyes, and her mother sitting beside her, and Mistress Anwen the governess hovering near, and Master Pelham the surgeon packing his bag in the corner. They all looked up when I came in, and I stopped on the threshold and bowed, and did not know what to do with myself, a great red guardsman in that gentle room. It was Maelin who broke it. She looked at me across the bright chamber, and for a moment her small face was uncertain, and then she said, in a voice still a little rough from the night, the thing that undid me entirely. She said, "You're the one who came." "Yes, Your Highness," I managed. "Everyone else was looking the wrong way," she said, with the grave matter-of-factness of a child stating an obvious truth that the adults have somehow missed. "But you were looking at me. I looked at you and you were looking right back. And then you came." She considered me a moment longer, and then she added, as if it settled a question she had been turning over all night, "I knew you would. Once I saw you were looking, I knew you'd come. I have stood through cannon. I have stood through a winter on a frontier wall and through 11 years of insults and provocations on the Harrowgate gates, immovable, unbreaking. I very nearly broke in that Green Chamber in front of the Queen at the words of an 8-year-old girl. I knew you'd come." She had hung, in the worst minute of her small life, on the certainty that the man against the wall was looking, and would come, and she had been right, and she said it now with a child's total faith, as though it had never been in any doubt, as though the whole agonizing second on the knife's edge had not happened at all because to her it simply could not have. Her faith made the thing I had nearly failed to do into the thing I could not possibly have failed to do. And I understood, standing there, that I would never be able to tell her about the second on the knife's edge, or the dead friend, or the lie that nearly won. That she would go through her whole life believing the guard had simply, instantly, certainly come, and that this belief was a gift she was giving me and I must never refuse it. "I'll always come, Your Highness," I said, which was not a thing a guardsman is supposed to promise, and was the truest thing I have ever said. The Queen made a small sound and put her hand over her mouth. And that was the morning of the first day, and it was the last gentle thing for a while, because the second day brought Lord Cassian Rayfort's answer, and the war for my head began in earnest. I did not see most of it directly. A corporal of the household foot does not sit in the councils where the fate of embassies is decided. But Marek saw a good deal of it, for an old sergeant has friends in every corner of a palace and knows things he is not supposed to know, and what Marek learned he passed to me in the guardroom of an evening, in his low flat voice, so that I would not walk into the hearing blind. And the Lord Steward, true to his word, kept me informed of what I needed to know. So I can tell you how the war was fought, even the parts I was not in the room for, because I have pieced it together from the men who were. Lord Cassian Rayfort was not a fool, and he did not make a fool's opening. A lesser man, wanting a guard's head, would have stormed and demanded an accused, and the crown would have closed ranks against the rudeness of it. Rayfort did the opposite. He was, by every account, the soul of courtesy. He sent the Queen that second morning a gift, a length of rare sea silk for the princess, and with it a note expressing his profound relief at the child's recovery and his heartfelt thanks to the providence that had spared her. He was, he wrote, a father himself. He understood. And it was asterisk because he understood the preciousness of a child, he wrote, that he found himself so gravely troubled by what the evening had revealed. For if the discipline of the Harrowgate household was such that a single armed guard could, on his own judgment, break from his post and rush the royal table at speed, weapon upon him, in the very midst of a state occasion, then what, the envoy asked with the gentlest possible regret, was to prevent the next such guard on a worse night from rushing the table with a worse purpose? The princess had been fortunate, but fortune was not discipline. And a delegation that must consider the safety of its own people, sitting at a table where any guardsman might at any moment decide to break his post and charge, could not in conscience proceed with the trust that a great agreement required, until it was satisfied that the household's discipline had been examined and answered. You see the shape of it. He praised me to bury me. He turned the rescue itself, the very speed and surety that had saved the child, into the proof of the danger. A guard who can cross the hall like that to save a life is a guard who can cross the hall like that to take one. It was clever, and it was cold, and it was, Marek admitted grudgingly, not entirely wrong, which is what made it so hard to answer. Because a household truly does depend on its guards not breaking their posts, and I truly had broken mine, and the only difference between the rescue and the nightmare Rayfort painted was the asterisk Y. And the Y is the hardest thing in the world to prove to a man who has decided not to believe it. And there was the deeper game beneath the courteous game, the one Lord Thornley had named that first night. Rayfort held the grain. He did not have to say so. Everyone in the council knew it. Every gentle word in his note carried underneath the unspoken weight of a hungry winter. Satisfy me on the matter of your discipline and we proceed. Fail to satisfy me, and I cannot answer for whether my masters across the Sunder Sea will think Eldermoor a safe and orderly partner for their ships. He never threatened the grain. He never had to. The grain threatened itself, in the silence behind his courtesy, and the silence did his work for him. So the hearing he demanded was not, on its face, a trial of me at all. It was framed as an asterisk inquiry into the discipline of the household, a face-saving formula, a way for the crown to be seen to take the envoy's concern with the utmost seriousness. But Marek and Thornley and I all knew what it truly was. An inquiry into the discipline of the household conducted to satisfy an offended envoy has exactly one natural conclusion. The guard who broke discipline is found to have broken it, is solemnly disgraced and dismissed. The household's good order is thereby demonstrated. The envoy is thereby satisfied. The grain thereby flows, and the eastern shires thereby eat. It was, as Thornley had said, a very reasonable trade. One guard for a winter's bread. From a certain cold seat, no trade in the world was more reasonable. And I will tell you the thing that gnawed at me worst in the guardroom on the night of the second day, when Marek had laid the whole shape of it out. It was not the fear of disgrace, though I feared it. It was the fear that the cold seat was asterisk right. I had broken my post. I had crossed the hall with a weapon upon me, in the midst of a state occasion, before a foreign embassy, and I had laid hands on the royal table. If you took the Y away, if you took away the child's gray face and her hand at her throat, and the look that crossed the hall, every single fact Rayfort named was true, and every one of them was a thing a guard must never do, and the household truly could not stand if every guard felt free to judge for himself when the rules might be broken. What if I were wrong? What if the next guard, seeing what I had done and how the crown had honored it, broke his own post on a worse judgment, and a worse thing followed? Was Rayfort, the cold, clever enemy who wanted my head, also, in the bloodless logic of it, correct? Had I, in saving one child, weakened the very discipline that protected all of them? I put this to Marek in the guardroom, lo, because it shamed me. And the old sergeant was quiet a long while, longer than I had ever known him quiet, and then he said the thing that I have carried beside the dead friend ever since. The two of them, the twin poles of everything I know about my trade. There's two kinds of discipline, lad, Merrick said. There's the discipline that's a rule, stand the wall, don't move, present arms on the count. That kind's easy. Any fool can learn it. You drill it into a man till his body does it without him. And it's needful, that kind. I'll not say it isn't, but it's the lower kind. The lower kind is for the days when nothing's happening, which is most of the days, and on most of the days the rule and the right are the same thing and a man never has to choose. He leaned forward, his gray eyes hard on me. And then there's the higher kind. The higher kind isn't a rule. The higher kind is asterisk, knowing what the rule is for. The wall's there to keep the royal house safe. That's what it's asterisk for. Every rule we've got, every post, every drill, all of it's asterisk for asterisk one thing, the safety and the honor of the house. And on the one day in 1,000 when the rule and the thing, it's for come apart, when standing the wall would mean letting the house come to harm, then a man with only the lower discipline freezes because his rule says stand, and a man with the higher discipline moves because he knows the rule was only ever a servant of the thing it's for, and he serves the master, not the servant. He sat back. You served the master, Vael. You broke the rule to serve the thing the rule exists for. That's not the failure of discipline. That's the whole of it. That's the highest there is. And if Rayfort or the council or anyone can't tell the higher discipline from the lower, that's their blindness, not your fault. Don't you take their blindness on yourself. I have heard a great many speeches from Sergeant Merrick. That is the only one I have kept whole. You served the master, not the servant. It did not save me in the days that followed, but it let me stand straight while I waited to learn whether I would be saved, and a man cannot always ask for more than that. The third day was the day of the hearing. I rose in the dark and cleaned my kit and dressed in my finest, and Merrick looked me over the way he had 3 nights before, and pressed his thumb to my collar, and this time it truly was a finger's width crooked, because my hands were not quite steady, and he fixed it himself without a word. And then we went up together to the great council chamber of Harrowgate Palace, where the court was gathered, and the embassy was waiting, and the queen sat in her chair of state with her face composed into the careful mask a ruler wears when she must do a thing in public that her heart is fighting, and the whole matter of my life, and the princess's rescue, and the kingdom's bread, was about to be decided in the open. And Lord Cashin Rayfort rose, smiling his courteous smile, to take my head. The great council chamber of Harrowgate Palace is a colder room than the banquet hall, all gray stone and tall narrow windows, built for judgments rather than feasts. The queen sat in the chair of state at the head of it, with the prince consort beside her and the lord steward Thornley standing at her right hand. Along one side sat the great officers of the household and the senior lords of the court. Along the other, the delegation of the Maritime League in their dark sea-colored robes, and at their front, Lord Cashin Rayfort. I stood in the open space at the center, alone, with Merrick behind me at the door, and I fixed my eyes on a point on the far wall above the queen's head, and I stood as I had been trained to stand, and I waited. Rayfort spoke beautifully. I will give the man that. He was a master of the cold art of seeming to praise a thing while gutting it. He began by once more expressing his joy at the princess's recovery, and his admiration, genuine admiration, he said, and I almost believed him for the quickness and skill the guard had shown. No one, he said, could fail to be moved by it. He himself had been moved, but... And then came the asterisk but, and it went on for the better part of an hour, and it was very good. He laid out, point by courteous point, the case I had feared, that a guard had broken his sworn post, that he had done so on his own sole judgment, answering to no order, that he had crossed a state occasion at speed, armed, putting aside by force the hand of a great lord who sought to stay him, that he had laid hands upon the royal table and the royal person of the princess herself. Each of these, taken alone, Rayfort said, was a grave breach of the discipline upon which the safety of every soul beneath the palace roof depended. Taken together on a single evening by a single man, they revealed, he was so sorry to say it, a household whose guards did not truly hold their posts at all, but held them only until their own private judgment moved them otherwise. And a guard who holds his post only until his own judgment moves him, Rayfort said gently, is not a guarded door. He is an unguarded door that has not yet been tested. I do not impugn this man's heart, Rayfort said, turning at last to look at me directly, his eyes mild and his voice kind and the knife perfectly placed. I have no doubt his heart was good. The child is alive, and for that we all give thanks. But a household cannot be guarded by the goodness of any one man's heart, for hearts cannot be inspected, and the heart that broke the post for love on Tuesday is, to the eye of any guest who must sit at that table, indistinguishable from the heart that might break it for some darker purpose on Thursday. The princess was saved by this man's judgment being good. My question, the only question I lay before this court, with the deepest respect, is what protects this table on the day a guard's judgment is not *good? For if the answer is nothing, if the answer is that a Harrowgate guard may break his post whenever his own private judgment commands, then I must tell you, with great regret, that the safety I am charged to secure for my mission is not a safety I can find beneath this roof. It was, as I have said, very good, and when he finished and sat, a long silence held the cold chamber, and I felt it tilt against me, the way a deck tilts, slow and sickening, and I understood that the case I could not answer, what protects the table when the judgment is bad, had been spoken aloud in front of the whole court, and that no one had yet answered it, and that perhaps no one could. The Lord Steward Thornley spoke for the household, and he spoke well, and he made every point that could be made for me, that I was a guard of 11 years' unblemished service, that the drill in the failing body is itself part of household discipline, that the princess would be dead but for me. He was measured and he was honest and he did not overreach, and when he was done the chamber was a little less tilted, but only a little because Thornley, for all his skill, could not answer the one thing either, the what protects the table asterisk, and a thing that cannot be answered hangs in a room and poisons everything said around it. Then it was my turn. The Queen, in her careful mask, bade me give my own account, and I gave it, the same account I had given Thornley in the guardroom, plain and exact, the hesitation and all. I did not try to be eloquent. I am not an eloquent man, and a guardsman who reaches above his station in a court of lords only makes himself a smaller thing. I told them what I had seen and what I had done. And then, because the silence after seemed to ask for it, and because Merrick's words were in me, I tried once to answer the unanswerable thing. I said, "My Lord Envoy asks what protects the table on the day a guard's judgment is bad. I am only a corporal, and I cannot answer for the whole household, but I can tell my lord this. A guard is trained more than anything to do nothing. To stand still while men curse him, while men weep at his feet, while every kind of commotion breaks around him, to do nothing, to stand, to hold. That is 9/10 of the whole of our training, and it is hard, harder than any man who has not stood a post can know. A guard who breaks his post does not do it lightly, because everything in him, every hour of every drill, fights against the breaking. The discipline that holds me to the wall is the very thing that makes my breaking of it mean something. I did not break my post because I am a man who breaks his post. I broke it because, in 11 years, it was the one moment that the whole purpose of the post demanded it, and the proof of that is that it was the only time in 11 years I have ever moved. The table is protected, my lord, by exactly the discipline you fear I lack. It is protected by how hard it is for a guard to do what I did. The day my breaking the post means nothing is the day guards break it lightly, and on that day the household is already lost, with me or without me." I did not know if it was a good answer. I am still not sure it was. But I saw something move across the faces of the court when I said it, a small shift, and I saw the prince consort lean and murmur something to the Queen, and for one breath I let myself believe, this is the false dawn, and I should have known better that I had turned it. That the chamber had heard and seen, and that the thing would now resolve in my favor, the guard vindicated, the envoy gracious in defeat, the warm tableau, the curtain. And then Lord Cassian Rayfort rose again, still smiling, and said, "A moving speech, truly, but the corporal speaks of his own discipline, and I do not doubt it. The question was never one man's discipline, it was the * households, and on that question, on whether the Harrowgate household can be trusted to govern its guards, I fear one man's fine words cannot be the answer. I would ask the court's leave to call a witness of my own, a member of this very household. A man who can speak to whether the corporal's act was, as he claims, a rare and singular thing, or whether the breaking of posts and the substitution of private judgment for orders is, in fact, a habit of this household that the corporal's act has merely brought into the open." The chamber stirred. The queen's mask did not move, but her eyes sharpened. "Call your witness, my lord," she said. And the doors at the far end of the cold chamber opened, and the witness came in, and my stomach turned over because I knew him. It was the young footman, the boy with the silver ewer, whose face had opened into a perfect circle of astonishment as I came past him in the hall, who had spilled his water on the cloth as I passed. A frightened lad of perhaps 19 in the household livery, twisting his cap in his hands, his eyes going everywhere but to mine. And I understood in a cold rush what Rayfort had done, and how much cleverer his game was than I had grasped. He had not come to argue the law of it. He had found the most frightened, most pliable, most junior witness to the whole event, a boy with no power and much to lose, and he had somehow, with gold or with fear, or with the simple weight of a great lord's attention upon a poor boy, he had prepared him. And he was about to use that boy to swear that the Harrowgate household was a place where guards broke their posts as a matter of habit, and to turn the one true thing, that my act was rare and singular, into a lie before the whole court. I looked at the boy, and the boy would not look at me, and I knew the false dawn was over, and the true dark of the thing had only now arrived. The footman's name was Tobin Carrow, and he was, I learned afterward, the youngest of a large and poor family in the city, with a mother and 4 younger ones depending on the wage he sent home from his place at the palace. He had been in service less than a year. He was exactly the kind of witness a man like Rayfort dreams of, too low to refuse, too frightened to lie well, too burdened to risk his place. I do not blame him for what he did. I have never blamed him. I tell you what he did so that you will understand what Rayfort was, and what it took to undo it. But the boy himself was only a leaf in a wind far stronger than he was. Rayfort questioned him gently, the way you question a skittish horse. He drew out first the easy true things that Tobin had served at the banquet, that he had been near the lower bend of the table with his ewer, that he had seen the corporal cross the hall. And then, by slow degrees, with a kind word here and a leading question there, he began to bend the truth. "And tell the court, Tobin, when the corporal came past you, did he speak? Did he give any cry of alarm, any call for help, any word at all to warn the company of danger?" "No, my lord," the boy said, miserable. "He didn't say nothing, he just come past, fast. He gave no warning. He simply broke from his post and rushed the table in silence." "And tell me, you serve in this household, you know its men. Is it your experience that the guards of Harrowgate are men who stand like statues and never stir? Or have you seen them, perhaps, leave their posts before, on other days, for other reasons, a friend passing, a thing they wish to see, a small matter of their own?" And here was the trap, sprung gentle and deadly, because every guardsman in the long boredom of a post has at some moment shifted his weight, turned his head, exchanged a low word with a passing comrade, small human things, nothing, the ordinary slack of a long watch. And a frightened boy, with a great lord's mild eyes upon him and his mother's wage in the balance, asked whether he had ever seen a guard stir. What could he say but yes? And a yes, in Rayfort's careful frame, became a brick in the wall he was building. The guards of this household stir, leave their posts, follow their own whims. The corporal's act was not singular but typical. The household cannot govern its men. I suppose I've seen them turn their heads, my lord, poor Tobin stammered. Shift about. Talk a bit low when they think no one's by, I suppose. Everyone does, I didn't mean. Of course you didn't, Rayfort said warmly. You are simply telling the truth, as an honest young man should. The guards of this household are men, like any men, who stir and talk and follow their own small judgments at their posts. And so when this corporal followed his own judgment in a larger matter, and broke his post entirely, and rushed the royal table, it was not, was it, so very far outside the ordinary way of this household after all? He turned to the court, spreading his hands, sorrowful and reasonable. I rest there, with the court's leave. I have shown you from the mouth of your own servant that the discipline of this household is not the iron thing the corporal so movingly described. It is a discipline of men who stir, and talk, and judge for themselves, and a household so governed cannot promise its guests the safety I am charged to secure. And he sat, and the cold chamber tilted hard against me, harder than before, because now the unanswerable question had a face and a witness, and the witness was one of the household's own, and there is no answer in the world to a thing a frightened honest boy has half said and a clever man has finished for him. I stood in the center of the floor, and I felt the thing slipping away from me entirely. I looked at the queen, and her careful mask was cracking now, not toward me but toward grief, the grief of a ruler who can see exactly what is being done, and can see, too, the eastern shires behind it, the grain, the hungry winter, and who is being driven, step by courteous step, toward the cold, reasonable trade she does not want to make and cannot find a way to refuse. I saw her glance at Thornley, and I saw Thornley's slight, grim shake of the head of a man who has run out of arguments. I saw the embassy's quiet satisfaction. I saw poor Tobin Carrow standing there twisting his cap, having helped to ruin a man without ever once meaning to, his eyes brimming. And I thought, standing there, this is how it ends then, not with the rescue, with this. A frightened boy, a clever lord, a hungry winter, and a corporal disgraced to save a kingdom's bread. Merrick had told me the minute in the hall was the easy part. He had been right. The easy part was crossing 40 feet to save a child. The hard part was standing still in a cold stone room while clever men proved, point by reasonable point, that saving her had been the act of an undisciplined household that must now, regretfully, be made an example of. I will not pretend I had a plan. I want to be honest with you to the end, as I have tried to be from the start. I did not in that lowest moment have some clever stroke held in reserve, some hidden card to play. I had nothing. I had told my truth and it had not been enough, and the boy's half-truth had been turned into a lie I could not unmake, and the grain stood behind it all like a mountain, and I was, in the plain sense, beaten. A guard does not win a war of words against a man like Rayfort. That is not the guard's trade. I stood there beaten, and I did the only thing a beaten guardsman can do, which is to stand straight in the wreck of it and not let them see the breaking. And it was then, in the lowest moment, when I had given up the last of my hope, that the great doors at the far end of the cold chamber opened a second time, without anyone having called for them to, and a small clear voice that did not belong in a council of lords said, into the heavy silence, "That's not true, he didn't see it." I saw it. And the whole court turned, and there in the open doorway, in a plain blue dress, with her dark hair brushed and her gray eyes blazing and Mistress Anwen the governess hurrying behind her too late to stop her, stood Princess Maelin of the royal house of Harrowgate, 8 years old, 3 days from the edge of the dark, who had heard, somehow, that they were going to punish the man who came, and had slipped her governess and walked herself into the highest court of the kingdom to stop it. For a moment no one moved. A child does not enter the high court of the realm. There is no precedent for it, no place in the seneschal's thick book. The whole machinery of the chamber simply had no answer for a small girl in a blue dress standing in the doorway with her chin up. The queen half rose from the chair of state, and I saw her face do something complicated, alarm, and a mother's instinct to shield, and underneath those, swift and unmistakable, a flash of something that was almost hope. Mistress Anwen caught up and put her hands on the princess's shoulders and bent to murmur to her, to draw her gently away. "This is no place for you, Highness. Come, come." And Maelin shook her off, not roughly, but with a small fierce certainty, and took a step into the chamber, into the open floor, toward me. "They're going to punish him," she said to the whole room, in the clear, high-carrying voice of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of a room full of important men. "I heard the maids talking. They said the foreign lord wants him sent away. Because he came and saved me. And that's not fair, and it's not true what that man said." She turned and pointed one small finger at poor Tobin Caro, who looked as though he wished the floor would open. "He said the guards stir about and don't really stand still, and so it didn't matter that this one moved. But I was there. I was the one who couldn't breathe. And I want to tell you what really happened, because nobody asked the one person who was actually looking." Lord Cassian Rayfort recovered first, and he did the only thing a clever man can do when a child walks into his careful trap. He tried smoothly to be kind about it. "Your Highness," he said, rising, his voice all warmth, "you have been gravely frightened, and no one in this room would dream of distressing you further. A court of law is no place for so young a—" "I'm a princess," said Maelin, "and it's about me, so I think it's exactly the place for me." And there was such plain unanswerable logic in it, delivered with such grave 8-year-old dignity, that a sound went through the court that was almost a laugh, quickly stifled, and I saw Rayfort's smooth warmth falter for the first time, because there is no graceful way for a great lord to silence a princess who has just told him correctly that the matter concerns her more than anyone. It was the Queen who decided it. She sat back down in the chair of state slowly, and she looked at her daughter for a long moment, and I watched a choice move across her face. The choice between the mother who wanted to gather the child up and carry her from this cold, hard room, and the Queen who could see, as clearly as Rayfort could, that the only thing in the kingdom that might possibly break the trap was now standing in the middle of the floor in a blue dress asking to speak. And the Queen chose the kingdom and her daughter both at once, which is the hardest kind of choosing there is. "The court will hear the princess," she said, and her voice was steady, and only I, perhaps, who had heard her cry her daughter's name across a banquet hall, could hear what it cost her to keep it so. "Maelin, tell the court what you saw. Tell it true and tell it all. No one will stop you." And the princess told it. She told it the way a child tells a thing, which is to say, without any of the lawyer's art, and with all of the terrible directness that the lawyer's art exists to soften. She told how she had not wanted her dinner, and how Mistress Anwen had been moved far away so she couldn't see, and how the lady with the bare shoulders next to her had been talking the whole time to the man on her other side and never once looked at her. She told how she had taken a big bite to be good because the governess had given her the eat-something face from down the table, and how it had gone down wrong, and how she had tried to cough and couldn't, and tried to make a sound and couldn't, and how. And here her clear voice wavered for the first time, and the whole cold chamber leaned toward her without meaning to. How she had understood, all alone in the middle of the loud, bright, happy room, that something was very wrong and that she could not tell anyone. Because she had no breath to tell them with, and her brother was turned away, and the lady was turned away, and her mother was so far up the table laughing, and nobody at all was looking at her. "And then," Maelin said, and she turned and she looked at me across the open floor of the high court the way she had looked at me across the banquet hall, "I saw him. He was all the way against the wall, and he was looking right at me. He was the only one looking. Everybody in the whole big room was looking the wrong way except him. And I looked at him and I asked him with just my eyes, because I couldn't talk, I asked him to come. And he came." She turned back to the court and her chin came up and the grief in her voice turned to something fiercer. "He didn't stir about. He didn't follow his own whim. That man," the finger at Tobin again, but gentler now, almost sorry, "is wrong, and I don't think he meant to be, but he's wrong. The guard didn't move because guards move around. He was the only one in the whole room who didn't move the whole dinner until I needed him. Everybody else moved. Everybody else talked and laughed and turned their backs. He was the one who stood still and watched. And because he stood still and watched, he was the only one who saw me. If he'd been stirring about like that man says, he'd have missed it too, like everyone else missed it. He saw me because he was the most still man in the room. And then he came and he hit me on the back. It hurt. It still hurts. I have a bruise, and the thing came out and I could breathe again. She drew a breath, a deep, easy, miraculous breath in front of the whole court as if to prove it. I can breathe, see. I can breathe because of him. And now you want to send him away for it. And I came to tell you that if you send away the one person in the whole room who was looking at me, then the next time a little girl can't breathe at a dinner, there won't be anybody looking at all. And she stopped, having said the thing that no lord in that chamber, no lord steward, no envoy, no queen had been able to say, having answered in the plain, unanswerable words of the one person who had actually been dying, the question that had hung poisonous over the whole proceeding. What protects the table? The princess had answered it. The stillness protects the table. The watching protects the table. The man who does not move is the man who sees, and the proof was standing in front of them, breathing, in a blue dress, having walked herself into the high court of the kingdom to say so. The cold chamber was utterly silent, and then into the silence from the long bench of the court, an old voice said, low and rough and not quite steady, out of the mouths of babes. It was Sergeant Marek. He was not supposed to speak. A sergeant has no voice in that chamber. He had said it under his breath, to himself, the way an old soldier says a thing he cannot hold in. But the room was so silent that everyone heard it, and no one rebuked him, because every soul in that chamber was thinking some version of the same thing, and the old sergeant had only been the one unable to keep it behind his teeth. I looked at Lord Cassian Rayfort, and for the first time in 3 days the courteous smile was entirely gone from his face. He had come to take my head, and he had built his whole clever case on the one question no one could answer, and a child had answered it in front of the embassy and the court and the queen, so plainly and so truly that there was nothing of his case left standing. He knew it. I watched him know it, and I waited to see what a man like that does when his weapon breaks in his hand. I did not have to wait long, because Lord Cassian Rayfort was cleverer and colder than I had yet understood, and a broken weapon, to a man like him, is only the cue to reach for a worse one. He rose and he inclined his head toward the princess with a show of deep feeling. "Your Highness honors us with your courage," he said, "and no one who has heard you could fail to be moved. I withdraw gladly any word that touched upon this single guard's heart, which is plainly good. The child is right. He watched and he saw and he saved her, and I rejoice in it." A pause, the cold turn coming. "But your Highness will forgive an old diplomat for seeing past the single brave man to the larger question that a queen and a kingdom must weigh. For the matter before this court was never truly whether one guard did right on one night. It is whether a household and a crown can be relied upon by its friends. And I must say plainly, with the greatest respect, that a crown which would let the tears of a child overturn the sober judgment of its own court, in a matter touching the safety of a foreign mission, is a crown that governs by sentiment and not by law. My masters across the Sunder Sea entrust their ships, their goods, and their people to Eldermoor on the understanding that here reason governs. If a princess's plea can unmake a household's discipline, then what is a contract worth here? What is any sober undertaking worth, if the next child's tears can undo it? I ask the court, I ask Her Majesty, to set sentiment aside, and rule as reason and the safety of all our peoples require. And there it was, the worse weapon. He had let go of my head, it was too well defended now, and reached instead for the throat of the whole kingdom. Rule for the child, and you prove yourselves a realm of sentiment, not law, and a realm of sentiment cannot be trusted with our grain. He had widened the trap until it caught not me but the queen herself, and the eastern shires behind her, and he had done it so smoothly that to rule in my favor now would seem to be exactly the weakness he had named. I felt the chamber tilt a third time, and I understood that the princess's truth, for all its power, had not been enough either. That Rayfort had simply moved the whole battle to higher and crueler ground, where a child's plain words could not reach. The queen sat very still. The chamber waited, and I watched her gather herself, and I have never before or since seen a sovereign do a thing as I saw Queen Maelin do the thing she did next. She rose. She did not rise as a mother. The grief and the fear and the hope all went out of her face, and what was left was the thing under all of it, the thing that makes a queen and not merely a woman who wears a crown, and when she spoke her voice filled the cold chamber to its stone corners without rising at all. "Lord Rayfort," she said, "you have argued well and coldly, and I have let you argue, because justice is owed even to a hard case, and because the grain of which we have both been too courteous to speak plainly is real, and the hunger behind it is real, and I would be a poor queen to forget it for 1 hour of this proceeding. So let me not be courteous now. Let me speak as plainly as my daughter did, for she has shamed us all into plainness." She came down a step from the chair of state, and the whole court held its breath. "You say that a crown which lets a child's plea overturn its court's judgment governs by sentiment and not by law. I tell you that you have mistaken the nature of law, my lord, and the nature of a crown, and I will not let the mistake stand in my own chamber. Law is not the enemy of the child who could not breathe. Law is her asterisk servant. Every statute in this realm, every post, every discipline, every line in the seneschal's book, exists for one purpose and one purpose only, to protect the lives and the dignity of the people of Eldermoor, and there is no smaller or greater person of Eldermoor than that small person standing on my chamber floor. A discipline that would have let her die at my own table to preserve the appearance of order is not discipline. It is its corpse. It is the asterisk form of the thing with the asterisk purpose gone out of it, and a crown that mistook the form for the purpose, that punished the one man who served the purpose because he broke the form, would not be governing by law at all. It would be governing by asterisk idolatry of the form, which is the death of every law that ever protected anyone. She let that sit, and then she turned the whole weight of it on him. You ask what a contract is worth here, if a child's tears can undo it. I will tell you, my lord, exactly what every undertaking of Eldermoor is worth, so that you may carry it across the sunder sea to your masters and let them weigh it. It is worth asterisk this, asterisk that the crown which signs it is a crown that will spend its own dignity, in its own high court, in front of its own offended friends, to defend the man who broke a rule to save a child, because that crown has shown you in the open that it knows the difference between the rule and the reason for the rule. That is what our word is worth. A realm that will not betray a guardsman who saved an innocent, even to please the men who hold its bread, is a realm whose other promises you may also trust to the bone, for you have seen, with your own eyes, the price it will pay rather than abandon what is right. If your masters want a partner who will sell its rescuers for its supper, my lord, they must look elsewhere. They will find many such. They will not find one of them worth trusting, and they will not find that here." The chamber was so silent I could hear the candles. Lord Cashin Rayfort stood with his clever cold face gone quite blank, and for a long moment he did not answer, and I understood that he had no answer, because the queen had done to him exactly what the princess had done to him, only on his own higher ground. She had taken the very thing he made his weapon, the trust of a realm, and turned it round, and shown that his cold trade was the thing that would asterisk destroy trust. And her defense of one guardsman was the thing that would asterisk prove asterisk it. He had brought reason against sentiment. She had shown him that the deepest reason and the truest sentiment were, in this, the same thing, and that only a shallow man mistook them for enemies. Then the queen turned from him and she looked at me, the guard standing alone in the center of the floor, and her voice changed, the iron stayed in it. But something warmer came up under the iron, and she spoke now not only to me but to the whole court, for the record, for the realm, for all time. "Corporal Edrin Vael of the household foot," she said. "This court finds that you did not break your discipline. This court finds that you kept it, that you served on the night of the state dinner, the highest purpose your post exists for, at the cost of the lowest rule, exactly as a guardsman of true honor must when the two come apart. There is no charge against you. There never should have been." She paused, and the warmth won out over the iron at last. "And there is something owed you that no finding of a court can pay, and that I will not insult by trying to pay in this cold room. But know this before the whole of my court and the embassy of the Maritime League. My daughter lives because, in a hall of 200 souls, one man was still enough to see her and brave enough to come. The crown of Eldermoor does not forget such a man. It honors him, and it would sooner go hungry than disgrace him. It would sooner go hungry than disgrace him." She had said it aloud, the unspeakable thing, the grain, the trade, and she had spat on it in front of the man who held it, for my sake and for the principal's sake both. And in the silence after, I, who had stood 11 years on the gates of Harrowgate without once breaking my composure, stood in the center of the high court of the kingdom and felt my throat close and my eyes sting. And I locked my jaw and I held it, because a guardsman does not weep in the high court, and I would not shame the queen's gift by breaking under it. But the princess broke from me. Maelin, who had been standing through all of it watching the grown-ups fight her battle with their grand, cold words, understood enough of the ending to know that it was won, that they were not going to send away the man who came, and she did the thing that no statute and no argument and no queen's iron could have done. She ran across the open floor of the high court of the realm, in her blue dress, and she threw her arms around the waist of a startled red-coated guardsman and held on. There is no protocol for it. A guardsman does not embrace or allow himself to be embraced on duty. A princess does not run across a court of state to fling her arms about a corporal. The whole rigid machinery of the palace had, for the second time in 3 days, no answer at all for what a small girl had simply gone and done. And I stood there, in my full kit, with the heir's sister holding onto me with all the strength in her small arms, and I did the only thing my heart would let me do. I put one white-gloved hand, very gently, on her dark hair, the way I had in the banquet hall, and I let her hold on, and I held the line of my face against the breaking by the thinnest margin I have ever held it. And the high court of the Kingdom of Eldermoor, the great lords and the senior officers and the embassy of the Maritime League, all of them, I heard it begin softly and grow, and I could not look up to see it for fear of what looking up would do to me. The high court rose to its feet, not because anyone called them to, because there are moments when even the most disciplined room cannot keep its seat, and a child holding onto the man who saved her, in the wreck of a clever lord's cruel argument, was such a moment. They stood, and some of them were weeping, lords who had not wept since boyhood, and the standing and the silence together made a thing more solemn than any cheer could have been. That was the end of Lord Cassian Rayfort's case, and very nearly the end of Lord Cassian Rayfort. But I must tell you what became of him and of poor Tobin Carrow and of all of it, because Marek taught me long ago that a story half told is a kind of lie, and the worst of it is that the loose ends are the part that keep a man awake. Rayfort did not, in the end, sail home in a fury and starve the eastern shires. That is the part everyone expects, and it did not happen, and the reason it did not happen is the most useful thing in this whole story for a young man to understand about power. Rayfort had never truly wanted my head, you see. He had wanted asterisk leverage. The whole affair, the courteous note, the demanded hearing, the frightened footman, had been, from the first, a maneuver to put the crown in his debt, to manufacture a grievance he could then graciously forgive in exchange for better terms on the grain. A guard's disgrace was never his goal. It was his coin, and he meant to spend it. And when the queen broke the coin in front of the whole court, when she made it impossible to disgrace me without disgracing the crown's own honor, and then declared that honor was worth more to her than the grain itself, Rayfort found that his coin had vanished from his hand, and that he was now the man who had tried to ruin the savior of a child and been beaten by an 8-year-old in the open, before the whole court. A man like Rayfort cannot afford to be that man. The story would cross the Sunder Sea whatever he did. The only question was which story. So he did the thing that clever cold men do when they have lost. He changed sides so smoothly that he seemed never to have been on the other one. He bowed to the queen, and he said, "And I will give him this." He said it without a tremor, that he had sought only to test the discipline and honor of the Harrowgate household, and that he had found it to exceed anything in his long experience of courts. For here was a realm whose discipline knew the difference between the rule and the right, whose meanest guardsman would die for an innocent, and whose queen would defend that guardsman against the world. Such a realm, he said, was a realm his masters would be honored to trust, and he looked forward to telling them so. And he gave the grain better terms than the crown had dared hope for, in fact, for a man recovering from a public defeat is generous to seem gracious. And the eastern shires ate that winter, and ate well, and never knew that their bread had hung, for an afternoon, on whether a queen would betray a guardsman. I have thought about that a great deal. The hungry shires never knew. The men and women and children of the East who ate that winter never knew that the grain came to them down a road that ran through a high court and a child's embrace and a queen's refusal to sell an honest man. They only knew there was bread. And I have come to think that this is the truest shape of the whole trade we are in, we who guard, that the people we keep safe almost never know the moment we kept them, that the worth of a guard is mostly invisible even to the ones it saves, and that a man must learn to do the work for the sake of the work and the people, and not for any thanks, because the thanks will mostly never come, because the people will mostly never know. The eastern shires owed me a winter's bread and never knew my name. That is not a complaint. That is the job. A guard is the watching no one sees, doing the keeping no one knows, and if he cannot make his peace with that, he is in the wrong trade. As for Tobin Caro, the frightened footman whose half-truths Rayfort had used to build his wall, I want to tell you what happened to him, because it is the part of the story I am proudest of, and I had nothing to do with it. The boy was undone by his own testimony long before the princess answered it. I had seen it in his face, the misery of a decent lad who has been gently led into helping to ruin a man and knows it and cannot find the way out. After the court rose, while the chamber was still in its uproar, Tobin Caro did a brave thing. He went to the Lord Steward of his own accord, with no one compelling him, and he confessed. He told Lord Thornley that Lord Rayfort's man had come to him the night before the hearing, and had not threatened him exactly, but had spoken warmly of how a young man with a poor family might find his fortunes much improved by a great lord's favor, and how that favor would surely follow if his testimony emphasized the asterisk natural human stirring of the guards rather than their discipline. He had not lied, the boy said. Every word he spoke had been true, but he had been asterisk aimed, and he had known he was being aimed, and he had let himself be aimed because he was afraid for his place and his mother's wage, and he could not live with it, and he wished to be punished and to give back any expectation of the Lord's favor, and he begged only that his shame not be visited on his family. And here is the thing I learned about the household I serve. The Lord Steward did not punish him. Lord Thornley listened to the whole of it, and then he told Tobin Caro that a man who is afraid and gives way to it is a common thing and a forgivable thing, but a man who, having given way, comes forward of his own will to undo it at the cost of a great lord's anger, that man is rare, and that man is exactly the sort the household wants, because he has shown the one quality that cannot be drilled, which is that his conscience is stronger than his fear. The boy was not dismissed. He was within the year raised, given a better place, and then a place of small trust, and he is a steward of the lower household now, a sober, careful man who watches the young footman the way Marek once watched us, and who has told me more than once, in the quiet way of a man who does not forget a debt, that he tries every day to be worth the mercy he was shown. I count him a friend. I am glad, in the strange accounting of these things, that Rayfort chose him, for a cruel man's choice of a weak instrument gave a good boy the chance to find out he was stronger than he knew. But all of that came after. In the high court in the moment, there was only a child holding onto a guardsman and a cord on its feet, and a queen who watched the two of them with her hand pressed to her mouth, and the iron all gone out of her at last. And when the princess finally let me go, gently uncoiled by Mistress Anwen, who led her back to her mother, the queen stepped down the last of the steps from the chair of state, and she came across the open floor of her own high court to where I stood, and she stopped before me, and she did a thing that no one in that chamber had ever seen a sovereign of Eldermoor do. She inclined her head to Corporal. It was not a deep bow. A queen does not bend low to a guardsman. There are some things even gratitude does not undo, and the order of a realm is one of them, and I would not have wished it otherwise. It was the smallest inclination of the head, the thing one equal gives another in the matter that for one moment has made them equal. But the whole court saw it, and the whole court understood it, and so did I. In that small bend of a crowned head was everything the cold court could not pay and the warm words could not hold. You saw my child when I did not. You are the reason she breathes. I know what I owe, and I will not pretend the crown is too high to acknowledge it. I have served 4 more years since that day, and I will serve until I am too old to stand the wall, and I have been given a medal for that night, and a sum of money I did not want and gave mostly to Tobin's mother and the families of the eastern shires, and a commission raising me out of the ranks that I accepted because Marek told me I would be a fool not to. But of all of it, the medal, the money, the commission, the Queen's own words read into the record of the realm, the thing I keep, the thing I will carry into whatever comes after this life, is the small bend of that proud head in that cold room. A queen does not have to bow. That she chose to is the whole measure of what kind of queen she is, and what kind of realm she keeps, and I count it the highest honor of my life that I was the man she bent to. I went back to my post. That is the part no one ever asks about, and it is the part that matters most, so I will end on it. The medal and the bow and the high court are the parts people want to hear, and I have given them. But 3 days after the high court, when the embassy had sailed and the grain was secured and the realm had moved on to its next 1,000 concerns, I put on my red tunic and my tall bearskin and my white gloves, and I took up my rifle, and I went back and stood the same post, the same long unmoving watch I had stood for 11 years before the night of the state dinner, because that is what a guard does. The honor is not in the saving. The saving is the work of 1 minute in 1,000 minutes. The honor is in the standing. In going back, after the great moment has passed and the court has forgotten and the world has turned to other things, and standing the wall again, still, silent, watching for the next minute that may never come or may come tomorrow, and being ready for it either way. The bow was the reward. The wall is the life. And a man who understands the niche I have tried to show you understands that the wall was always the greater of the two. I should tell you, too, what became of the others at that table, for a story is the people in it, and I have left some of them standing where I dropped them. Prince Joran, who had been turned away talking of horses while his sister could not breathe, took it harder than any of us, and in a way none of us expected. He was 10. And 10 is old enough to understand that you were 6 feet from your sister and did not see, and not old enough to have any defense against the weight of that. For a while after, he would not leave Maelin's side. He followed her about the palace like a second shadow, fierce and watchful, and twice I found him standing a small grim sentry go outside her door at night, in his nightshirt, having appointed himself her guard. It worried his parents, and they came near to forbidding it. But I asked leave to speak to the boy first, off the wall, soldier to soldier as near as a corporal and a prince can be, and I told him the thing I most needed him to understand, that what had happened was no one's fault, least of all his, that a brother is not a watch and cannot be, that the failing was the room's and not the boy's. And then I told him that if he wished to turn his fright into something useful instead of letting it eat him, He could learn what I had learned, not to stand guard over his sister every hour, which no one can do, but to know the failing body drill, so that if ever he were the nearest one again, he would not be helpless. He took to it like a soldier born. He is 14 now, the prince, and he knows the drill as well as any guardsman in the household, and he has made his peace. And he and I are friends in the particular way of two people who were both in a room on the worst night of a child's life and came, each in his own way, to be worth the second chance. I think he will be a good king one day, when his time comes far off, because he learned young the lesson it takes most rulers a lifetime to learn or never to learn at all, that the highest in the land is still only as safe as the most ordinary watchfulness around him, and that a crown does not exempt a man from the duty to see. Mistress Anwen the governess, who had been walled off 3 seats down and had spent every day since flaying herself for it, the queen kept in her place and never once reproached, for the queen understood, as a just ruler must, that the governess had been moved by another's order and could not have prevented what she could not see. But Anwen reproached herself enough for the whole court, and it changed her. She became, after that night, the most watchful governess Harrowgate has ever known, a woman who counts the children with her eyes 100 times a day, and has never again, not once, allowed herself to be seated where she cannot see her charges, whatever the seneschal's book or the demands of any embassy may say. She told me once, quietly in a corridor, that she says a prayer of thanks for me every night, and I told her just as quietly that she should save her prayers for herself, for the watch she keeps now is worth a dozen of the 1 minute I am praised for. I meant it. The minute is over. Her watch goes on every day. The daily watch is always the greater thing. And the envoy's wife, the woman in the borrowed chair with the bare shoulders, who had talked the whole evening to the man on her other side and never once looked at the child beside her. I have wondered about her sometimes, for she was no villain, only a guest at a feast who did the ordinary thing a guest does and turned to the conversation in front of her. She left with the embassy, and I never saw her again. But I have thought that she, of all of them, may carry it the longest and the most quietly, for she will never be praised for watchfulness she failed to keep and never be punished for a fault that was not quite a fault, and will only know, alone, for the rest of her life, that a child nearly died at her elbow while she laughed, and that the not knowing was the most natural thing in the world, and that is exactly why it is so terrible. I hold nothing against her. I tell her part of it only because she is the rest of us. She is every person at every table who turned to the bright thing in front of them and did not see the small dark thing at their side, which is to say she is nearly everyone, nearly always. The marvel is not that she did not see. The marvel is that anyone ever does. There is one more thing, and then I am done. After that night, I taught the princess a signal. It was Merrick's idea, in truth, though I was glad to be the one to do it. We agreed, the two of us, the old sergeant and I, that a child who had once been unable to call for help in a room full of people should never be in that place again, that she should have a way to reach the watch that did not need breath or noise or the lucky chance of one man looking the right way. So I taught Maelin a small sign, a particular folding of the fingers against the palm, that meant asterisk come, and I taught it to her in the green garden one afternoon with her mother watching and approving, and I made her practice it until her small hands knew it without thinking, the way my hands knew the failing body drill, the way Merrick's thumb knew a crooked collar. And I told her, I knelt down in the grass to tell her, which is a thing a guardsman may do off the wall, that she need never be afraid in a crowd again, because she would always have the sign, and that whatever guard of the household foot saw it would come, every one of them without question and without delay, because I would see to it that every man who ever stood her watch was taught what it meant. You will never again be the only one who knows, I told her. Now we all know. Now you only have to make the sign and we come. She has made it twice in the 4 years since. Both times it was nothing, a press of a crowd that frightened her, a moment she felt lost, and both times the nearest guard came at once, quietly and stood by her until the fright passed, and it came to nothing, and that is exactly as it should be. A signal that is mostly answered for nothing is a signal that is working, because it means the watch is real, and the child trusts it, and the one time it is not nothing, the watch will already be in the habit of coming. The whole of my trade is in that. In coming for the nothing 10,000 times, so that you are there for the one time it is everything. I am an old soldier now, or near enough, and I have told this story more times than I can count to young guardsmen on the night before their first state dinner, mostly because there is a lesson in it I want them to have. They always think the lesson is about the rescue, about the speed, the drill, the breaking of the post, the great moment when the still man moves. And those things are in it, and they are true. But that is not the lesson. The lesson is the thing the princess said in the high court, the thing a child saw that all the clever lords had missed. He saw me because he was the most still man in the room. The moving is nothing without the stillness that earns it. Any man can rush a table. It takes 11 years of standing the wall, of doing nothing, of being furniture that breathes, to be the one man in 200 who is watching when the fork goes down. And the watching is the whole of it. The watching is everything. The watching is the only thing that was ever truly mine to give. I gave a great hall a single minute of motion, but I gave it 11 years of stillness first, and the minute was only worth anything because of the years. So if you are young and you stand a post, and the long hours of nothing wear at you, and you wonder what the worth of it is, the worth of standing still while the world streams past and never looks at you, never knows your name, never guesses what you keep, then I will tell you, who once let a man die in a cold barracks because I could not tell the lazy stillness from the true, and who once crossed a banquet hall in a single minute because, that time I could. The worth of it is this. Somewhere in some loud, bright, happy room where everyone is looking the wrong way, there will one day be a small person who cannot call out, who can only look, who needs there to be one set of eyes in all that room turned the right way. Be that set of eyes. Stand the wall. Do the nothing, the long, faithful nothing, until the moment the nothing is everything, and then move and not before. That is the whole of the trade. That is the whole of the honor. And a child breathes tonight in Harrowgate Palace because, on one merry evening against one wall, a man whose only worth was his watching watched. I would not trade that for any crown,